Alright, time to keep my word.
Another water in the night. Let me paint the view. Color the town with...
Last time I visited this series, a number of details and plots focused on with the anime were, by all accounts, not even half of the entire first part of the manga. My biggest criticism with this was that, pacing it right, this series could have been a relatively faithful adaptation. Hell, part 1 of the manga could have been 2, maybe even 3 seasons worth of anime episodes. Yeah, my issue wasn't that the story wasn't finished, therefore the second season was shit. It was despite the fact that the manga having a ton of story to already work with at this point, the anime just decided to throw all that shit out the fucking window and just do so much stuff that was worse in comparison. Like, instead of Skune coming to terms with being both yokai and human and walking the line between both what's best for him and life and death, we got...
There's nothing to curry about.
My line! I only get a few each episode and you just... We've all been very naughty girls.
Stop it, please, I beg you!
And for the people saying...
It's clear that they wouldn't have had much to work with considering when the anime came out, so your points about the manga being better falls flat because it wasn't finished yet.
Okay, let's talk about this. Actually, let's break down the timelines, because I actually did a little research into this in terms of the timelines of the manga and the timeline of the anime. So, part 1 of the manga released from 2004 to May of 2007. When did the first season of the anime release? That was January to March of 2008. So that means everything from Skune getting off the bus to the academy and the story around Hokuto Antithesis, all of that was already finished. And that was just part 1. And instead of being actually more faithful around that and focusing more on what the story was actually about from arc to arc, the second season does to the manga what Discovery did to animation. As for part 2 of the manga, that released in November of 2007 to 2014. Despite that, the anime also decided to bring in Kokoe, a character you wouldn't even know about if you didn't get to the second part. Yeah, why I bring up these time frames is because I have heard people that want to use the excuse of this series still being in production as kind of a smoking gun. The reason why I stuck to part 1 to begin with was because there was more than enough time for the studio to adapt it, but also pace themselves. But hey, maybe we can change that. If series like Fruits Basket, Spice and Wolf, even Blue Exorcist were being given more chances to shine with the source material, maybe if this vid takes off and gets the attention overseas, who knows? So, let's talk about part 2 of Rosario Vampire's manga. It's obvious but major spoilers, and I'd recommend pausing this now and binging the manga yourself, because we're about to get into it. Part 2 takes a step back from its prior formula of introducing characters, eluding mystery and tension on what side they ally on, and pulling the rug under the characters' feet to focus more towards the characters themselves we already have in play, with adding more around them. One of the first real antagonists we get is one of Mocha's sisters, after all. As for the main character, Skune, the Chekhov's gun of his locket is put more emphasis on as he's given opportunities to tap more into his vampiric state while learning how to control the power. It's nothing new, other shonen battle series do this as well, but, and hear me out, the anime has him groping and face-planting in the crotch of his friend's moms. So I'm not gonna act like the bar here wasn't set pretty damn low from the get-go. As for Mocha, well, part 1 more focused on Skune and him growing accustomed to his new lifestyle, both figuratively and literally. Part 2 actually goes into focusing on Mocha being more of a character as opposed to, well, what she was in part 1, a plot device. Part 1 was more Monster of the Week-esque storytelling, so inner Mocha's purpose is just to be Sam from Holes, I guess.
I can fix that.
But yeah, for a larger focus, actually showcasing her more as being a genuine character and fleshing her out more was honestly the better route to go. Mocha's focus takes a step back from being conflict-focused and more directed towards being character-focused. She steals the whip Skune used to train to bypass the seal and go on a date with Skune. She participates in a school festival over a ruined lunch. She spends a day out of the Rosary to go to classes. For the larger picture, it's completely and utterly pointless. But honestly, I think that's what's so good about it. Something I don't like around stories like this is that when it comes to downtime or personal matters, you don't really see these characters genuinely being capable of doing something during those times, and still being given the same kind of care with the writing in these moments. One of my favorite examples of this is in Infamous 2.
Hey. Hey.
This story focuses around a world-ending epidemic and preventing it, while the main character needs to prepare to face it. It has nothing to do with the game. You miss nothing really by skipping it, but it's there. It's there because the writers wanted to have these characters be on their own outside the story, even if it was for a minute. To me, stuff like this is what makes characters more of a mainstay. Having a bunch of guys kick back and hanging out, not even bothering with shit that matters.
I love that part.
Opens the story up to expanding just on who they are as opposed to just what they are. As for the other characters, there's genuine focus placed on them, even if it isn't throughout the story. Mizore's story focuses on the difference between being around others and being yourself around others. Kurumu goes through the feeling of unrequited love, constantly being tortured to her. Even Yukari gets focus, going away from being the love-struck fan of both Mocha and Skune, and feeling like she isn't someone who's worth much to the people around her. It is honestly pretty clever that all of their issues, even Skune's desire of wanting to not be part of it, or Mocha's story around trading her strength and her desire for the fun of a normal life, all of these issues are, when you get down to it, all identifiable to the age groups they're portraying to some degree. Being introverted, dealing with rejection, questioning your self-worth, these are genuine problems, and the story utilizes this with fantasy elements to help see to them in the end. But, okay, all that's good, so what about the rest of the story? Well, I imagine there are still people who haven't read it yet, so I don't want to give away too much yet, so instead I'll opt for this. From part 1 to part 2, I feel like it's clear, or at least somewhat apparent, that there was a shift in the storytelling. And personally, I kind of feel like Ikeda, the creator, probably didn't have much of a plan for this story. Here's how I figure this. Part 1 is, at least for a good half of it, very Monster of the Week-esque with its storytelling, with much of the attention being put on the details of the world and the monsters. Which, to be frank, they are pretty damn impressive, and they resonate a somewhat gothic horror feel to me. Apparently, if this is true, in making the story, Ikeda was inspired by Tim Burton's works for his world, which I could honestly believe. And regarding the story, I think that might have been the main focus, is just making this world look the way it does. It's fun, it has some really good art to it at points, it's even downright a creepy world at times. But I feel like if this had carried over in the entirety, it would have gotten stale. And to his credit, I also think Ikeda knew this. Which is why, for the most part, the second half of the manga feels distinctly like its own story in a lot of ways. Exploring more of the world, properly introducing characters it's established with its lore, such as the legendary 3 Dark Lords, Mocha's family, even characters like Gin actually add more to the story that begin to feel like it was part of a larger picture. The Rosary in this is an important cornerstone to the story. Even with Part 1's formula, this opens and explores Mocha's character. Even that was a question the anime never really answered. Why does she need it? The manga utilizes something trivial as a cross to be the black hole of the series. That being, everything centers and drains into that very factor. You take that away, and you take the story away. The Rosary, the legendary 3 Dark Lords, stuff like this is what Part 1 never really focuses on, but in Part 2, they actually play more of an integral role for the story. And that's not even going into Fairy Tail, not that Fairy Tale, yes that Fairy Tale, or characters like Kokoe. even the art in a number of places just got better to me. So, while I did mention how well done and even how time-consuming the art in Part 1 was, I think it's important to really talk about not just how much of an eye for the detail the artist has, but also the fact that the art has got a great sense of visual clarity to it, especially in fights. And that's not nothing, especially with a medium like an art book where the pages keep the drawing still. Objectively, the biggest problem when it comes to fights in manga is not necessarily that they're done poorly, but rather if they're done in a way that you can't even fucking tell what's going on without being told what's going on. Manga art uses lines to indicate a direction of movement and a consistent pattern. That way, any objects or people can stand out more. Sometimes line work is ditched and more emphasis is placed on actions on a blank background. Sometimes the artists go even so far as to break borders to better illustrate intention alongside the movement. But sometimes you do get works done by artists that have such an extreme eye for detail that it actually serves to confuse someone reading it without taking more time than normal to really understand it. Although, in looking for different series to invest in, I find works that know how to strike that balance between simplicity and complexity really well. Artists who have a great attention to detail but know how and where to use it. And that is what I see being focused on here with the art. The fights are very detailed, but they never just feel like random line work. More detail is given to specific parts of a panel, many times to showcase a change in the event, from an altered background to the characters themselves. Part 1 does have some pretty damn creative imagery, but the spooky, scary skeletons and whatnot always feels a little awkward. A number of times, especially in dramatic moments where the visuals look stilted or just off, and not in an intentional way. And I understand making good art is difficult, trust me on this, especially in an industry like this. So, maybe it really isn't that bad from my perspective. I mean, I honestly doubt Part 2's art puts the stuff here to shake.
Jesus Christ!
What the f? Oh. Oh, I'm sorry, that's from Junji Ito. Let me just fix this up. Huh? This is not Junji Ito? Well, damn. Okay. Yeah, the visuals in this are immaculate to say the least. It really looks like Ikeda actually improved on the art style so much in this. It's impressive to say the least. Like before, when I said, yeah, I could believe it was inspired by Tim Burton in a lot of ways, this feels like genuine evidence that it was inspired. Like, we got cityscapes, old people, body damage, a fucking airplane. All we need is some redesign for the characters and we're set.
I have crazy boner right now. Like, I am fucking rock hard.
I'm going through something with life, but pussy and patrol make you feel alright.
Okay, so now that I got my art boner taken care of, let's talk about the last arc for anyone who wants to know my thoughts on it. So, whereas with Part 1, my biggest criticism was that the heel turn card was used so frequently that Hokuto wasn't really that much of a reveal in the grand scheme of things. Here, I actually think it works really well. Up until this point, the story has been more linear, aside from what's in the first volume, but the focus was more towards actually introducing an antagonistic force revealing itself, and less...
You were behind all this? Yes, it was I. My machinations lay undetected for years, for I'm a master of
Yeah, we've seen the Stalker try to blow up his ex. What else can you offer? Well, interestingly, this is that what else. Next to everyone's character's arcs, Mocha's role showcases her desires on display as she goes back and forth between being weak and strong for different reasons. But next to that, there's her family and the truth of the rosary she carries. There's also Tsukune's resolve to save her, which damn near has him losing control, and there's also the focus of humans and yokai coexisting versus both sides clashing for victory. And around the end of it all, there's this blurred array of lines towards outside the party. Who exactly here is trustworthy? All this while Mocha has to come face to face with what it's like to feel useless in full. All of this combines to bring forth this monster, pun intended, of an arc that just keeps raising that fucking ceiling until it just all comes back down to level. We got heel turns, we got tension, we got fights, we got romance. It's some good shit! And like I mentioned in my last vid, what happened to Hokuto in part 1 happens here with Tsukune as well, with an interesting contrast. Whereas with Hokuto placing the blame of his state of being on the world of the yokai and essentially having to manage it by himself, Tsukune's time with everyone and learning to control his powers led to him wanting to protect everyone. Hokuto became a monster out of selfish spite, while Tsukune became a monster out of selfish preservation. Hokuto undid his locket seal due to his hatred for the yokai in the world, while Tsukune undid his seal due to his love for both. Two sides of the same coin. There is more, but I'll stop here. I think you get it. If the anime went down the route of actually being more of a seasonal work, and the people in charge didn't bother to make the spit-in-the-eye mistake that was the second season, and instead gave the series the adaptation it deserved, this really could have been so much more to me. And I imagine to many people who have read and loved this manga. Well, admittingly, yeah, part 1 was very formulaic, as the vampire power is just a plot device until they do something more with it, and like I said before, much of the early story is very focused on that heel turn aspect. The second half of it had a genuinely interesting focus around Tsukune and his decision towards being human or embracing his newfound yokai powers. And part 2 genuinely felt like instead of repeating the same stuff as before, it explores new ground and territory with story beats that weren't really a thing back then. And this was all well after the anime was done, because like I said, the anime at this time could have absolutely stuck with part 1 for its second season in full, and you would have had at least enough story for an adaptation that may have had some changes, but overall kept the same story intact. But I know people don't give a shit. In fact, some of you probably just commented, well, of course it's good, because when it's finished, you can't put that on the anime when it was made during the series still being written. That's not fair. And ignoring and or not even listening to anything I fucking say, because that's just way too boring to do, I guess. Fuck me for spending weeks to months on videos to be found by a bunch of kids who go, but I'm right, you're wrong, suck it, boomer. As for everyone else who made it to the end of this video, if you genuinely listened to what I said, and despite all this still disagree with me and even think the anime is better, I've got one thing to say to you. Thank you for giving me your time. Look, I know I have a hate boner for this series, but I'm not gonna hold that against people who are willing to admit that they like shit like this, whether it be for their own reasons or just because. And if regardless of what I have said in this video, you still do enjoy it, then fuck the timelines, fuck the manga versus anime debate, hell, fuck me for making this video to begin with. I'm not the all-knowing god of anime or some shit. I'm an otaku who spends way too much free time jerking off nostalgically to series I imagine a lot of you nowadays have never even seen or read. So if this makes you happy, then good for you. I'm happy for you. Right up until you say that the anime is just better than the manga, and that it's unfair for me to criticize it due to it not being finished.
Because you don't know what you're fucking talking about.